Hey, welcome back to Garbro's Field Desk. I have for you Chapter 5 of Emily Braun's Laments of Blood and Flesh. I actually have Chapters 5, 6, 7, and 8 written. I just got a little sick, and unfortunately that sickness didn't leave for a while. Then someone else got sick. So it's been a bit behind on the chapters. I do apologize for that. Even now you can kind of hear how I sound kind of stuffed up. But we're going to do our best to bring you some entertainment to help you out through your work day. So, let's go ahead and get on into it. Chapter 5. New, not for long.
The coal roller made good time, even better time with Devon goosing the gas and not paying much mind to the brake. The path was more or less clear as they made their way down the refined tunnel space, not even pausing for the stranded vehicles or their dead occupants. Sometimes they came across a small pocket of cultists, and Devon made sure to swerve the giant vehicle their direction and run them over with little care, spattering the wheels and undercarriage with the well-crushed smears of limbs and meat. No one spoke much on the ride, just steeling themselves for whatever lay down below. Emily slept, her eyelids having slid shut almost as soon as she had sat down in the passenger seat. Emily woke back up groggily when she felt the heavy vehicle rumble to a stop, rocking back and forth as Devon applied the brakes.
We're at the tunnel mouth. Road doesn't go any further. We shaved off time,
Devon said matter-of-factly, turning off the coal roller and picking up his gear. Emily sighed out her nose and numbly fumbled with the door handle.
How long were we driving for?
Roughly half an hour. Took us all the way down the tunnel,
Devon replied, hopping down the steps to the ground. Emily wobbled down her own steps into the muggy, swelling heat of the tunnel, the AC of the coal roller having lulled her to sleep and cooled her. Now that she was back out into the depths of the earth, she began to wonder if this was what a pork bun had to feel like. Cold, chilled, comfortable, and then suddenly tossed into the steaming heat to fluff and cook. Mercifully, no one felt a need to point out Emily's zombie-like state as they all tapped the toes of their boots on the ground and began to walk, heading towards a large tunnel opening that Devon pointed to.
Intel says this is the start of the path, but then it's going to get twisty and confusing real quick,
Devon said. Oscar nodded.
Yeah, this is one of the main arteries that runs parallel to the other tunnel that leads to the main diving grounds.
This tunnel is going to be littered with cultist stragglers,
Humir said dourly, rotating a knob on her scope and then turning on a small flashlight.
and it has no lights.
Dale patted a small sack on his waist belt.
No worries there. Plenty of extra batteries, chem lights, and flares.
And if you run out of flares, you can make torches. Bound to be bodies aplenty.
Katja murmured, already running a stethoscope around her neck. Emily groaned out, leaning backwards with a crackling of her spine.
Yay!
Everyone around her chuckled, though Humir just regarded Emily with cold, judging eyes.
Come on, troop,
Devon said with a smile, then started walking into the cavern, the light from his CZ Scorpion casting around the walls. Despite Emily's hopes, the bodies did not take long to show up. Divers from all over had been using this tunnel as an alternate route around the main diving grounds, finding it via minor passageways that had been carved or blasted away. When the cultists had amassed, dozens of diver groups had tried the tunnel, only to be run down by the massive wave of cultists that had already been funneling through it. Their bodies were torn, ripped, and ragged, splayed out awkwardly around the tunnel path, as if they had been cut down and then kicked aside to not impede the path. Their weapons had been carried away, as well as their gear and loot, but Emily still took a few seconds to search for their information cards, as well as having Davin mark their location on the little map he had with him. The heat may have been oppressive, and sweat may have been flowing down her skin in rivers, but Emily felt like it was her responsibility to make sure the bodies got where they needed to be when this was all over. After they stopped to collect and mark the 50th body, Dale wiped at his forehead, leaning against a nearby tunnel timber.
It's a miracle that anyone made it out at all. All of them have wounds that mark them as being attacked from behind.
Bogart and Dexter just shrugged, the two brothers drinking from their own canteens.
They found out too late, likely. The survivors made it because they had a huge head start. Someone must have had an advanced tech piece that could pick up the same signals we use down here to track the cultist movements.
Gale puffed out, taking the card from Emily and sliding it into her rucksack.
If not, they would have been run down just like these poor bastards.
The cultists that we have to deal with down here are exceptionally zealous. Very fast, very motivated, and from what I now understand, it's because there is a religious icon down here, or some sort.
Humir said, turning to look at Emily.
The one you have been chosen to destroy.
Emily re-shouldered her rifle.
Yeah, more likely that's the reason why. Shouldn't even be down here anyway. They need salt water. How could they get seawater all the way here?
Humir shrugged.
Below water level tunnels, magic, ancient underground oceans. There's no telling.
Underground oceans don't exist on Earth,
Gale said, giving the elf a weird look.
All our oceans are on the surface.
Everyone has underground oceans.
Humir said flatly, puffing a strand of hair away from her face.
And Earth has one as well. Nymphs have communicated with it a few times, and we have theories about it.
Elven bullshit.
Bogart rumbled, screwing the cap of his canteen back on. Dexter chuckled.
Easy, brother.
Humir pretended as if she didn't hear them and turned to Gale as Emily checked in with Davin and the map.
Our planet's core is a life force, as are all planets. However, Earth is very different. Your core is molten metal, and around this core are layers of stone and mineral. Then, just along near the surface is a vast amount of water.
And what, you think this is some kind of magical life force?
Gale snorted.
Let's go, fellas.
Emily called over her shoulder, setting off with Marill and Davin. Gale stepped off after them, along with everyone else.
Even if there is an ocean, it isn't magical. Humans can't use magic.
We believe it is a similar type of material to our own cores, a thin layer of life force to fuel your race. How else could you all exist on this rock?
Humir stated, blinking her purple-red eyes in a bored manner.
Out of spite.
Oscar said with a laugh, ripping open a small packet of energy gel.
Humans exist purely out of spite, of course.
Perhaps this underground ocean is the great source of spite that humans feed off of.
Humir said thoughtfully, but furrowed her brows when everyone else began to chuckle. Marill shook her head, teeth flashing in a smile.
It's a good idea, Elf. But the truth is, no one has any idea where humans are. Let alone what keeps them going or where their gods are. The only god confirmed so far is some creepy death god that walks around with a scythe.
At this, every human in the group stopped walking, and even Emily spun around, looking up at Marill in shock. Marill's ears quickly drooped, and she looked around nervously.
What, something I said? Are you saying the Grim Reaper is real?
Emily asked her, wide-eyed, while beside her Davin looked quite unhappy at the prospect. Marill looked over to Humir, who just smiled a frown at her with raised brows as if saying, "Ha, your turn."
Well, yeah. I mean, you guys manifested him a long time ago. A true demigod was finally able to cross over yesterday, and your Grim was there to greet her and show her around. You guys didn't know?
Marill asked, ears still pinned down and back.
Why didn't you tell any of us?
Emily guffawed, gesturing wildly to Marill.
That's rather important information to know.
Marill gestured with open hands back at Emily, spluttering.
It was in the fucking Crossing Guard Daily. Humans don't read the fucking CDG.
Emily roared, pointing to Humir.
Elves and shit read the Daily.
She's right.
Humir said in a low, humored tone.
Humans don't really read or get the newsletters from the cross-realm articles.
Bogart rumbled with laughter and turned to his brother.
Hey, Dexter, you hear that Prince Fleebleflork married Countess Pointy Here Magic Ass?
Oh my gosh, not Florstag. That affects me in so many ways back home,
Dexter said in such a dripping, sardonic tone that it may as well have been dipped into the bucket. Oscar couldn't help himself and let out a chuckled response.
Ah, yes, the microsprite migration is beginning. Just what I needed to know. Better set out the bird baths in my home on Albertath.
See?
Humir said, turning to look up at the fuming, embarrassed face of Marill.
Well, fucking anyway, yes, he is real, and he's the only god that has been confirmed on Earth.
Marill spat, only managing to not yell by inches.
And he ain't saying anything either, so no one knows where humans came from or what keeps them going.
Marill started stamping down the tunnel as Emily watched her go, the news still processing through her brain. She turned to look at Davin, her eyes wide.
What does that mean for us? What does that mean?
Davin looked down at Emily, his mouth set in a frown, but he said nothing, only lightly touching something under his shirt. Davin started walking after Marill, and Emily turned to the other humans in the group. Despite the earlier joke and bravado, they too seemed to be thinking hard on something, touching at their chins or looking at nothing in particular, eyes unfocused. Humir, however, was far less affected, rolling her eyes and snapping her fingers in the air.
All right, humans, enough of your self-reflections. Let's get going.
Emily swallowed, nodded, then turned on her heel, trotting quickly to catch back up to Davin. Two hours down the tunnel, there were far less bodies, and despite the roughness of the ground, they were still making good time, even if they were all still reeling from the discovery of the real, living Grimm. Much to Humir's annoyance, Emily was using the elf as a mental distraction and to pass the time.
So you're running away from home, huh?
Emily asked her, taking a swig from her canteen. Humir rolled her eyes.
I am not running away from home. I left.
Rather odd for a royal to run away from home, let alone an elven princess,
Gale remarked. Dale looked around to Humir, his fingers hooked in Katja's belt loop.
Oh, come on now. Royals running away from their families and castles has been a beloved trope for as long as there have been royals.
Princesses running away for true love. Princes and princesses going off on adventure to get away from the tedium of royal life. All are found in stories and songs,
Katja said in agreement, leaning down to kiss Dale on his ear.
I am not running away,
Humir said pointedly, angrily resting her rifle across her chest.
I left. It is very different.
Oh, sure,
Oscar said with an unbelieving smirk, pressing his lips together and nodding.
You just left. That's very different from running away.
Emily, however, raised a brow at Humir, blinking away the sweat in her eyes.
What made you leave?
Politics,
Humir said flatly, sniffing her nose in old, practiced annoyance.
And my father, and my mother. Whole rotten family, if I'm to be honest.
Emily nodded her head to the side.
I get that far more than you know.
They wanted to marry me off to some prince or another, create a stronger bond between the larger banner lords on our patch of forests and dirt. Prince Gular was an arrogant fuckface, and I wanted nothing to do with him,
Humir said.
Elf?
Emily asked. Humir nodded.
Yes, highborn, cheekbones and all.
Full of himself?
Yes.
Looked down past his nose, acted like an asshole. And let me guess, Prone to fits and tantrums.
Yes, and I only lasted a day in his company.
Emily and Humir smiled at each other for the first time since their meeting, and Emily had to admit the elf had a beautiful smile.
Looks like those types are everywhere,
Emily said, spitting onto a nearby cavern wall. Marill looked over her shoulder.
Yeah, and in every species. Once met a centaur that thought flirting was whacking your hind leg with his above-average piece of equipment. When he whacked me with it, I kicked it so hard, I left an imprint.
The thought came to mind when he slipped a hand up the leg slit of my throne dress,
Humir said sourly, the memory playing across her face as she glared and twisted her mouth.
Instead of spearing his testicles, I missed and stabbed him in the thigh with my salad fork 2 times. Went straight into the bone.
Behind her, the male humans hissed and chuckled. Marill giggled as well.
I'm sure his mommy dearest had words knowing you elves. Elven mothers treat their sons like possessions, primping and doting over them as if they don't even know how to feed themselves.
He was no different,
Humir said with a sigh.
Went straight to her, crying and bleeding all the way. Father came down on me hard, saying I embarrassed him, and I was locked away in my room until I thought about what I had done.
Katja smiled.
This is a part of the story where the princess formulates a plan to escape, ties some bedsheets together as a rope, and then flees the castle, roving out into the countryside to make their mark on the world as a mercenary general or pirate queen.
Not too far off,
Humir said with a light laugh.
Though I made my chambermaids tie the sheets for me, then told them to scuttle down and make sure the rope would hold.
Cold.
Dale said, chuckling as well.
Then again, elven royalty.
Oh, they were fine.
Humir said with a grunt, kicking a small stone out of her way.
Once I had them climb back up and fetch my rucksack, I took off and found the nearest access point to Earth. Paid my way into a diver company and started living the life I wanted.
Katja leaned down towards Dale, who leaned his ear up to her.
Humir is living a literal fantasy story. Elven princess on the run, yearning for adventure, seeking danger, maybe even hoping for a little bit of romance with some strapping human who rubs her ears the right way.
I most certainly am not.
Humir growled, whipping her head around to glare at Katja, who giggled to herself and poked a twisting finger into her cheek. Emily did notice a rather hot flush rising up Humir's neck, and she found herself smiling as well.
Oh, leave the elf alone. After all, elves are a proud, noble race. They can't be seen slumming around with just some mere human after all.
Quite,
Humir murmured, though she did cast rather angry glances to the male humans around her.
Stupid brutes.
Imagine my surprise.
Marill mused, resettling the strap to her snub-nosed M2 on her shoulder.
An elven princess that dreams of having her knees pinned to her ears by a human.
Humir bristled, lunging forward to make a retort, but everyone stopped mid-breath as Davin held up his hand and dropped to a knee. Everyone else except Marill did the same, though she did bring the barrel of her M2 to bear on the tunnel ahead of them. Emily crouch-walked up beside Davin, squinting through the gloom to see what the light from his scorpion was resting on.
What are we looking at, Davin?
Emily murmured to him, resting her own Bren rifle on her knee. Davin raised his chin towards a large, hulking figure just visible in the light.
Something big laying against the wall. I saw it shift when my light hit it.
Do you think it's dangerous?
Emily asked him, raising her own rifle and placing its beam of light on the same figure. Davin raised off of his knee and slowly crept forward, rifle trained on the figure.
Only one way to figure out, and we can't go backwards.
Emily swallowed, waved to the people behind her, and then crept up with Davin, adrenaline starting to slowly creep into her veins. As they closed the distance, Emily began to truly understand just how huge this thing was. Whatever it was, it wore a large suit of armor that was colored a dusky yellow, while along its pauldrons were jagged black stripes. The pauldrons themselves were huge, and Emily quietly wondered to herself how the thing even moved. As they got closer, Emily could see a large backpack-like structure at the rear of the armor, its metal torn and rent jaggedly. The chest plate was partially torn away as well, blasted apart by ammunition of an unknown caliber, though the metal itself looked melted in some way. As Emily rounded around the figure, she spotted the unhelmeted head of a man and gasped.
It's human!
No way in hell this is a human,
Davin said, looking down at the large, blocky suit of armor, its odd coloring and patterns, then to the large feline head that was painted on one of the pauldrons.
No human can move in a suit of armor like this.
Emily leaned forward, taken in the man's appearance. He had closely shaven hair on his head and a face that looked as if it was chiseled out of stone. Above his right brow was some kind of metal chevron that had been placed into his skull, though it shone brightly gold in the beams of the flashlights. His chest was a ruin of metal, melted materials, and torn meat, the blood dark and covered with dust in some places. Odd tubes stuck into his body at what seemed like random places, and the smell was just as weird. To Emily, nothing on the man smelled right. Even weirder was the suit of armor. Huge, advanced, and hulking, but it had an aura about it that said it was ancient and had seen things that Emily would never believe. In the armor, Emily could see phrases and words carved into it, and she ran her fingers along them.
It's not English,
Emily murmured, then quirked up the corner of her mouth.
Not Elvish either. Hell, these almost look like artistic wingdings.
They are not wingdings,
the man murmured in a deep, rumbling voice, and he cracked open his only good eye, the other a ruined mess of meat and metal fragments. Emily lurched backwards away from the man's face, slipping on some of the loose rock and landing on her ass with a screech.
That's our cue, darling,
Katja chirped, jogging forward with Dale on her heels.
Our cue? This dude is like 9 feet tall. The hell are we gonna do for him?
Dale said, already hissing through his teeth as he looked down at the massive hole of metal and flesh in the man's chest.
Or for that?
Katja frowned professionally and pulled around the bell to her stethoscope, pressing the diaphragm to the man's exposed, ruined pectoral. Her frown deepened, and Katja tilted her head at the noises coming in through her ears.
I hear a heartbeat, but it's faint, and it's followed by an even quieter one, like an echo.
Don't waste your devices upon me, apothecary diver,
he said, his voice ringed with a light, airy wheeze that spoke of just how hurt he was.
I am not long for this plane. Not anymore.
Who are you?
Emily asked him after getting to her feet.
Do you want some water?
The man nodded with a small squint of his good eye. Emily quickly unscrewed the cap to her canteen and moved on towards the man, crouching down on a knee as the loose floor below her scuffed and grumbled under her boots.
Can you use your hands?
Emily asked him, setting her rifle against his dusky yellow pauldron. He cast his remaining eye to his hand, which twitched and flexed weakly. He frowned, breathed in through his massive chest, then sighed.
No, I'm afraid it is no longer an option.
Emily swallowed nervously, then lifted her canteen, helping the wounded giant of a man drink. He spilled a lot of the water down his chin and cheek, but managed to get enough water down to give him some measure of spirit. He smiled weakly.
Thank you. It would have been a shame to die parched.
Emily nodded.
No problem. What happened?
Cultists.
He said, growling in his now lubricated throat.
Hundreds of them. Came at us from all sides. My brothers and I were on our way to challenge the being in the deep.
Emily looked up to Davin and Marill, then back to the man.
Challenge the being in the deep?
He nodded.
The old god that now dwells below us. They sent a woman barely into adulthood to fight it. We sought to cut her off, do the deed ourselves, gain our redemption.
He swallowed thickly, his blood-covered eyes staring at Emily.
Someone needed to stay behind to give both us and the other divers time. I volunteered. I held them for as long as I could here, but the tunnel was riddled with side entrances. It was all for naught.
Survivors made it to mile marker Cola,
Emily said with a smile, giving the man a light pat on his pauldron.
Lots of them.
The man smiled at this, gently nodding his head.
How many?
Plenty.
Emily said softly again.
Over 100 of them.
He leaned his head back a bit against the shattered backpack behind him.
1 life for 100. I'll take that. Maybe I'll be able to see the light again. After this is all done. After I find my way home. Maybe he will forgive me.
Heartbeat is failing.
Katja murmured to Emily, still listening to his chest. Emily nodded to Katja, then leaned in more towards the wounded man, doing her best not to brush against his exposed, wounded flesh or his torn armor.
I'm sure you will. You did good here and saved a whole bunch of people. I bet he'll even send the light to find you.
A small tear, a tear that must have been as old as the man's armor, traced a line down his filthy cheek. He looked at Emily, and despite the tear, his voice was even.
Do you think so?
Yeah, buddy, I think so.
Emily said in a cheerful tone, reaching down to pat his thickly armored hand.
I do.
The gauntlet twitched just enough to hold Emily's hand. It confused Emily's senses for something so strong to feel so weak.
You'll find my brothers deep down in the depths. They'll be victorious. We always are. We always have been, even so far away from home.
He said, swallowing again.
Take them my knife, will you?
Where is it?
Emily asked him.
My belt. Right side in the sheath. They took my grenades, my sword, and my pistol, but I was able to keep them from taking my blade.
Emily tried to reach across the man's chest, but didn't want to let go of his hand, so she looked up and around to Marill.
Marill, could you grab this man's knife, please? I can't get to it.
Marill nodded.
Yeah, sure, no problem.
Marill reached down and pulled the large blade from its sheath, and she let out a low whistle.
A knife? Big man, this is a short sword.
He chuckled wetly.
Well, it's a knife to us, anyway.
The knife shone brightly, if not proudly, in the light. It was painted the same way as the man's armor, a dusky yellow along the thick spine with those odd black tiger stripes. The edge shone with a razor-sharp gleam, and was curved in such a way that it almost looked like a talon, much like a falc's. Despite its size, it looked elegant, refined, and it seemed wrong to call it just a knife. Emily felt the aura coming off the knife trickle along her skin, almost like the armor the man wore. The blade felt old, crushingly old, as if it had been made hundreds of years ago and passed down through the ages.
My old friend for many a battle.
The man wheezed, nodding his head at the knife.
My tiger talon. Take it.
Emily held her hand out for the blade, and Marill handed it to her. Despite its size, it felt comfortably light, though it still had plenty of heft.
It feels good.
Emily said kindly, holding the knife in front of the man so he could see it and coax a smile from him.
Real good looking blade.
The man did smile happily, though the smile was still weak, and Emily felt his hand twitch.
Will you stay?
Emily looked over to Davin, who sighed but nodded his head.
We bought time with the coal roller.
We'll stay, big man.
Emily said in a hushed, quiet voice to the man, giving his giant armored finger a squeeze.
We won't leave you alone.
We've been alone for so long.
The man said, and Emily felt him relax for the first time, laying back in his ruined armor.
We really thought we could find a way home.
Emily pressed her lips together.
We all find our way home in the end, big man.
I hope so.
He said, and closed his blood-covered eye, sighing out with such exhaustion that Emily truly began to wonder just how old he was.
I do hope you're right, that our souls can travel amongst the stars.
Emily gave his finger another squeeze, and his armored hand twitched just enough to hold her own a little better.
It is a shame,
he said weakly, trying to smile again.
I like this new name, Big Man.
Katja continued to listen to the man's heart, and Emily continued to hold his hand, all the way until Katja pulled away the bell of her stethoscope.
No heartbeat.
Katja said, placing her device back in her backpack.
He's gone.
Emily gave his armored finger a wiggle. No more twitches or reactions came from his face, and she let him go, leaning back on her heels as she exhaled.
I placed a marker a little while ago.
Dale said, placing a small tag on the man's armor.
They'll pick him up with the rest when this is all over.
Emily held the blade tiger talon in her hands, letting the end rest on her knee as she stared at the man's face. She looked around to the humans, catching their eyes.
Any of you know who this guy was?
Emily asked aloud, looking at the man's ruined but now peaceful face, a slender smile on his dead lips.
Must be some kind of military unit that came in during a plane collision, or maybe slipped in during a crack storm.
All kinds come in during crack storms. Surprised he didn't join a diver company.
Marill said, tilting her head at Emily.
Coulda come in handy for a little mission, don't you think?
Emily shook her head.
If we find his friends and they couldn't take out the Flesh Tailor, it's gonna be a miracle for us to pull this off.
They all continued back on their path in silence this time, their feet pounding urgently on the tunnel floor as they surged forward. The heat was unbearable, and their water was almost completely gone when they broke out into an expansive underground cavern, the ceiling so high above them that they couldn't even see it unless they pointed their lights directly at it. The rank stench of old salt water and blood was so thick that Emily's nose rankled, while behind her Humir stifled a quiet dry heave.
Flesh rafts.
Oscar called out, casting his light towards the water.
Holy fuck, there's hundreds of them.
Gale spun in a circle, looking around her.
Wait a minute, if we're this close, where are all the cultist survivors? There's no way we could have beat them here.
Could be hiding in the water, maybe,
Humir said thickly, her hand holding her stomach. Bogart and Dexter shrugged to each other, picked up a rock each, and tossed the pair into the water. The two stones splashed in the water with little flare, and when nothing happened, both of them turned to Humir and shrugged.
Seems fine.
Bogart said, gesturing to the water. Dexter grimaced.
Yeah, but now the rafts are moving.
Emily turned her gaze to the many rafts, laid end to end as a form of floating bridge, and she swallowed hard as they began to stir. Arms raised as pale, bloated hands reached into the air, eyes opened, blinking, still trying to see. Bodies twisted and writhed from within their magical bindings, wiggling in mass like maggots upon rotten meat. Emily didn't have to turn around to know the splash of vomit hitting the loose stone ground was Humir's, the elf choking out water and bile wetly as Dexter gave her back a soft pat.
We have to cross them,
Emily said, more than asked, staring flatly at the writhing mass of bodies. Devon nodded.
Mm-hmm.
We could always swim,
Marill said cheerily, which made Emily crack a sardonic smile.
You first, horsewoman.
Emily mused, but took the first step forward herself, placing her foot on the raft. She regretted it as soon as she did. As her boot pressed down onto the mass of squirming bodies, the raft reacted in kind, taking notice of her and focusing in on her presence. Hands, eyes, and faces swiveled as far as they could to lock onto her. Fingers grasped out at her pant leg. Eyes watched her go, and the mouths that could moaned out in recognition. The mouths moaned her name, then began to beg for help, to beg Emily to cut them free from the raft. Emily swallowed again and looked down, seeing that the bodies weren't just magically sewn together, but were woven together. Flesh and bone melted together seamlessly at some points, while at others, arms and legs were braided together like cordage, all coming together to bind body to body, flesh to flesh, and bone to bone. The rafts looked as if some god was playing with human bodies like a child may mash their hands into Play-Doh, pushing all the colors together to create a horrifying rainbow clay.
My daughter,
one mouth moaned, the woman's face halfway blended into a man's groin flesh.
My daughter.
Thirsty.
Another mouth groaned, the man's once lithe features grotesquely fused with the woman's pectoral muscles.
Thirsty.
Bogart stepped onto the raft behind Emily, but when a hand reached up to grab at his pant leg, he growled and whipped his hand around, smoothly pulling a machete from his rucksack and cutting the arm away at the wrist.
Men of warfare tactics,
Bogart rumbled, kicking at another hand that shrunk back down into the raft's writhing bodies.
I can't do it!
Humir squealed, quickly stumbling backwards from the raft as a man moaned at her to help him.
There's no fucking way.
Katja, Dale, Oscar, and Gale hopped onto the raft with little care, while Marill grimaced and stepped onto the raft carefully. Dexter slung his rifle over his back and scooped Humir up into his arms, holding her in a literal princess carry.
All right, Elf, we can't leave you behind, and we can't stay here all day waiting just for you. Just hold on to my ruck straps.
Humir's fear-white face flushed as she grabbed Dexter's rucksack straps with a death grip, her knuckles paling with the strain. As Emily made her way past the first raft, then the second, and third, the mental toll of walking on these people began to steadily weigh on her.
There's thousands of people on these rafts,
Emily breathed out, wiping at her face with her already soaked sleeve.
Thousands of them.
Marill nodded, her hooves sinking into a man's stomach as she resettled herself.
All woven together? Yeah. I just hope they're not actually alive.
They're alive.
Devon said, sourly, pointing.
Because that one there is dead.
Emily looked to where he was pointing and saw a child who must have been no more than 12, laying slumped against a woman's hip. His eyes were dull, lifeless, and his body didn't move or writhe like the others. His body shuffled slightly, and Emily realized as it sank into the mass of bodies an inch or two that it was being consumed.
They're eating him,
Emily said, her voice devoid of emotion as she walked forward, looking down at the boy's naked waist.
My God, they're eating him because he's dead.
Oscar walked beside Emily and leaned over with her, grimacing as he saw what she was seeing.
Ah, I see. Oh, there are rows of mouths all around him.
Oscar turned his flashlight to the little pit forming around the slowly sinking body of the child, and pearly white teeth flashed within the light.
Looks like some kind of formed consumption entity,
Oscar said with a scowl, jerking backwards as a large, fanged mouth made entirely of canine teeth lurched out of the fleshy mass and sunk eagerly into the boy's stomach, ripping flesh and intestine away messily.
Jesus Christ.
I don't want to be here.
Humir whined pitifully, her eyes wide as she looked around her, then to the corpse of the boy slowly being eaten by the flesh raft.
It's all wrong. It's all wrong.
The boy's limp head lolled to the side, his mouth opening somewhat as his body was jerked downwards again by the hungry teeth.
Let's keep moving,
Emily muttered, stepping past the boy's corpse onto a new raft. Gale walked slowly by the boy, her eyes watching him with both weariness and open distress.
We're just gonna leave him?
He's dead.
Dale said as he moved past her, holding out his hand for Katja to help her cross over.
He's been dead for hours. The flesh rafts consume the dead to keep living, or anything they can manage to catch. He'll be gone within half an hour and transferred to the collective core of these things.
But can't we?
Gale murmured, turning to look at the boy once more. Katja sighed, shaking her head as she took Dale's hand and crossed over.
There are flesh rafts that are still alive from the Great Floods. Some divers have escorted scholars to go and speak to them to learn what happened during the flood. They are beyond help and even harder to kill, sadly.
Come.
Bogart said to Gale, holding his hand out to her.
Leave the dead.
Gale sighed unhappily, but took Bogart's hand, the large man helping her hop to the other raft. Emily trudged on, taking the lead now and keeping the others moving. The heat was starting to get to her. She felt soaking wet with every step, and she was pretty sure water was sloshing out of her boots' vent holes. The rafts continued to moan and squirm as Emily walked across them, though at this point she kicked the hands out of the way or made a point to step on a face that was asking for help. She wanted off this ride, and she wanted off of it now. Emily was walking so fast that the others were starting to lag behind. Dexter and Marill having the hardest time of it due to load and having to manage multiple legs.
Fucking hell, this is like having to walk on a bunch of meat-filled pillows,
Marill growled as she warbled and staggered across the bodies, her hooves proving difficult on such a squishy path. Dexter puffed out his cheeks, still bundling a whimpering Humir in his arms.
Yeah, I get that.
Oscar laughed uneasily, stumbling forward as a hand gripped at his ankle and threw off his step.
Oh, come on, dude. Why you gotta be like this? Thirsty.
The man with the hand wheezed, his face stretched painfully tight and wider than any face had reason to be.
We're all thirsty.
Gale groaned down at the man, kicking away his hand as she followed after Oscar. All of them stumbled to a stop behind Davin, who had held up his hand warily as he leaned forward.
Emily, is everything okay?
Emily stood bolt upright, alert, her rifle held up in front of her with the beam of light laying on two figures who also stood upright on the last raft.
Emily?
Marill said, stepping forward slowly.
You okay?
Emily panted out past her bared teeth, her eyes wide as she held the beam of light on the two figures leaning up from the edge of the last raft. She didn't respond, only slowly stepping forward as her panting quickened along with the hammering of her heart. As Emily walked forward, one of the figures leaned towards her, the woman's dusky green eyes peering out from her ratty, tangled red hair.
Emily?
She croaked out, her eyes struggling to focus on Emily through the light. The other figure, a man with more brown in his hair than red, leaned his head up, squinting through the light.
Emily? Is that you?
Emily hissed out through her teeth, her CZ brand shaking in her hand.
No way. No way.
Emily, baby, it's me. It's Mommy.
Her mother said, her voice a raspy creak as she reached out for Emily with swollen, bent fingers.
Come to Mommy.
Her father reached out with his own hand, the fingers almost skeletal from the lack of flesh.
I forgive you, sweetie. It's okay. We can be together again.
Emily screamed out wordlessly, then pulled back on the trigger of her Bren.
And that's the end of chapter 5. Chapters 6, 7, and 8 soon to follow, God willing. If you like these stories and others like them, be sure to like and subscribe to the channel of Garbro's Field Desk, and hopefully here soon I'll be less nasally and stuffed up sounding in the next videos. Also, the first book/edition to Emily Bronze is for sale on both Amazon and on the Coffee, which you can buy a signed copy if you're into that kind of thing. I've also been talking with Chloe and Eggplant and myself about redoing the first and second book of the Veil Rider series, but inserting art pages into the book, like kind of like a light novel, but not nearly as weird or hentai-y. Stop by the Discord for alerts and teasers. Go to the Coffee channel for both signed copies of the book, pins, keychains, patches, as well as gaining a membership. Now with the memberships, what you do is you allow me to budget out a little more appropriately in order to pay the VAs, plus certain tiers of members get teasers every time a new chapter is done. That way you get a little bit of a taste of what's coming in the coming chapters. That was Danger, our senior female VA. That was Fire. That was Moonmeadow. That was Amanda. That was Annika Storm, our new narrator. Hailey, RB Sounds. And this is Garbro's Field Desk. We'll see you next time.
Advanced tech piece. Fucking tech piece. Tech piece. Rather odd for a royal to want to fucking run away. Christ. Rather odd for a royal to run away from home.
They're eating him. They're eating him. And then they're gonna eat me. Oh my God.